Welcome to Undressing Intimacy, where we cut through the bullshit
Greggy,
so we can get naked.
you can't say that.
Why not? How would you say it then?
Well, maybe more like, welcome to Undressing Intimacy, where we undress emotionally so we can undress physically.
That's exactly what I said. Not sure what the problem is. Welcome to episode
Number 24.
We are so glad that you're here. This is finally going to come out. Amy has some pent-up tension.
I don't have
And
pent-up tension.
I can't wait to record this podcast because then it won't come towards me. She'll just let it all out. So we're going to get started.
I have not just me, have an unpopular opinion, but I don't know that it's pent-up tension.
Yeah, we were prepping for this, and I could feel it coming from her. So this is going to be an exciting one. If you ever wanted to see what Amy looks like when she's angry, we're about to find out.
Oh, fun.
So we're going to talk about something that's very popular in the relationship world.
That we totally disagree with.
Here we go.
Are you ready for this?
Let's do it.
Okay, I would say probably at least 50 to 60% of the time when I'm coaching a couple, at some point this book or ideology comes up. And this book is called The 5 Love Languages.
Amy just wants 2, so she doesn't like the number.
Oh, it's nothing to do with 5.
Okay.
It was written by Gary Chapman, and the premise of the book is that each of us has a primary and sometimes a secondary way that we like to be loved. And those 5 languages are affirmation, gift giving, touch, acts of service, and quality time. And the premise of the book is, in a marriage, you have to give your spouse their love language in order for them to feel loved.
Yeah, we talked about this once, and guess what? My social media account blew up with all the advertisements for this program, and I'm afraid that they might listen to this podcast and get mad at us. But there is a problem with this. Mm-hmm. Because as we talked about before, when we go about seeking a certain validation from our spouse to help us feel a certain way, it's problematic, right? Mm-hmm. Because our spouse cannot give that to us, no matter how much they try. They can speak in whatever language we think is wonderful. They can do all the things we think we want. And in the end, our little brain up there is the one that gets to decide whether we feel loved or not.
Yes, so I remember reading this book a long time ago when we were first married and recognizing that my 5th language was physical touch and your first language was physical touch, and that mine was acts of service. My first language was acts of service, and my second was words of affirmation. And so I remember times that you would really go all out and do these things, whether it was like cleaning the whole house or taking the kids for a day or planning a nice getaway. And they were really nice. I did appreciate them. So there is nothing wrong ever with being kind to your spouse. First of all, hear us saying that. We are not against being kind to your spouse. But they definitely didn't speak to the underlying problems, and they definitely didn't speak to the underlying problems that were happening in our marriage. In fact, they played into it, and they didn't expose what was really happening. And I didn't actually believe yet that I was worthy of your affection or love. So even if you would say you're the best and I choose you or you're wonderful, I didn't believe that I was worthy of being chosen or wonderful. So it didn't really resonate in me. So you were even speaking what was supposedly my love language, air quotes, and yet I wasn't hearing or understanding you.
We've talked a lot about the framework we're set up in, right? That we are told that as we go into marriage, it's our job to take care of the other person. And this showed up in a lot of ways that we've talked about, where you thought it was my job to take care of your emotions. I thought it was your job to validate me. If you hear what I'm saying here, it's what the book sets up. Here is your love language. Now you need to take care of that spouse by doing these set of things that they want or desire. And really, in the end, like we talked, that it's not about the things we say and desire. It's about the intentions we come from and how we, one, think about ourselves and care for ourselves, and two, how we bring ourselves to that marriage. And so just with that framework that we talk about, that we come into marriage with, this definitely plays into it.
Absolutely. And I think we like this framework. Again, like when we were on the podcast with Dr. Jennifer Finlayson-Fife, do these 3 simple things. Just do this 1 or 2 simple things and your marriage will be healed. Your spouse will feel loved. We want things to be really simple, really easy, a quick fix. But I think that undermines the actual complexity of us as human beings and the fact that marriage is supposed to develop and grow us up.
Yeah.
And if it were a 1-2 quick fix, where's the growth and development?
Whenever you're trying to take something so complex and narrow it down to 5 things, you're never going to be able to fully understand the complexities about it. And you're going to lose the complexities of it. And like you said, that marriage, that's really where we grow, is in those complexities and what we have to face on both sides.
And the conflict of them. I'm thinking of even last week, I was in a men's coaching, and this is how I commonly see love languages show up in coaching. So I'll just share this. A gentleman showed up for coaching and was saying, my wife and I were just so stuck. I know her primary love language is acts of service, and so I have been doing all of the things for her. And my primary love language is physical affection, and I am doing all of these things for her, and I am not getting anything back. And I'm so resentful, and I'm so tired, and why am I doing this and not getting that?
Yep, the tit for tat.
Yep. It sets us up to be transactional. And that has a lot of problems. First, to think that you're entitled to something. I'm entitled to physical affection. I'm entitled to words of affirmation. I'm entitled to acts of service. I'm entitled to gift giving. Well, none of those are inherently bad. And I don't think the author, Gary Chapman, has malicious intent or intends to harm in any way. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is when you go into a framing that is, if you do this for me, then I'll give you this, you've set up transactions. And on one side of that transaction, someone's entitled to get, and the other one's obligated to give. And the entitlement and the obligation, those are problematic in a marriage.
That's just how we were set up, right? That was our marriage for 18 years, was entitled to obligation. And we've always talked about obligation. There's only one thing that will ever result out of obligation, and that's resentment. It might not show up right away. You might be able to go about this for a while, but eventually the person that feels obligated to do something will always end up resenting. I remember one time I was in a church meeting, a men's church meeting, and this topic came up. And they got stuck on this. No, we're obligated to do all these things. God wants us to do these things. And I kept forcing them. If it's out of obligation, you will eventually resent. So I think it's all parts of our lives, right? If we're going to church and we're doing these things of kindness because we feel like we're obligated to do that because that will make us good people, eventually we'll become resentful. It's learning to integrate those things within you and do them because not out of obligation, because you truly desire them. And that really is what this marriage thing is set up to do, is to get you out of this mindset of obligation and that you have to do something and that you choose. Intimacy is born out of choice.
Yes, it is.
It will not grow anywhere else. Eroticism only comes in choice.
Yep.
Remember, Jennifer was talking and somewhere else. She's like, eroticism never wants to be told what to do. When you start making rules for eroticism and saying you have to do this and this,
it will defy them all.
Go away. And so what we're really trying to say is we got to get out of that entitlement and get out of that obligation mind frame to be able to introduce choice and intimacy and breathe that eroticism into our marriage.
I am saying maybe somewhat helpful in this book that was written is learning that your spouse is different than you. Of course they are. Of course there are meaningful things they can do for them. But do not be caught in the thinking that if I do this, then I will get this. Or if they give me this, then I have to give that. That's where the problem lies. So yes, of course, learn your spouse, know them, enjoy them, love them, but watch for the transactional. If I do this, then I'm going to get this. That is a really dangerous trap for couples. And again, it causes that entitlement and obligation, both of which create resentment. And if there's anything that's going to destroy a marriage, it's resentment. Literally, I've seen marriages be able to work through anything. But when they have studied marriages, the one thing that will absolutely erode it is resentment. And so the difficulty of this is, yes, know your spouse, learn your spouse, understand them, but don't get stuck in this transactional framing, because that will lead to resentment and that will erode your relationship.
Let me flip this on its head.
Okay.
I think even differently. Go read the book. Learn what your love languages are, and then become very curious of why you think that way. Because I think that will tell you some interesting things about yourself. If I would have read the book and it was physical touch, and I would have said, like, you need to give me physical touch, would have gone, why do I think physical touch is my love language? And I would have dug into that. I probably would have got to the bottom of my need for validation. And that when you touch me, you tell me I'm okay. And when I'm okay, that means you're validating me. And I'm a validation whore. So even right now, as we're talking about this, flip it on its head.
Yeah.
Go learn what your love language is and then ask, why the hell do I think this?
Like, I needed your acts of service because I felt like I wasn't enough.
Yes.
I needed your words of affirmation because I felt like I wasn't enough. So maybe if it's flipped on its head, it's actually about showing where you need to develop.
Grow up. Yes, exactly. I'm thinking right now, my love languages were where the hell I needed to grow up.
Yeah. Yes. And if you are so caught in thinking this is what my spouse should be giving me and doing for me, what you're doing is just staying stuck in exactly where you need to grow.
Okay, we won't get in trouble anymore. So go buy the book, read it, pick out your love language, and then that's the place where you need to grow up. I like it.
Yeah. And the other thing about, I think, marriage is teaching us how to love, right? So Gary Chapman did get that right. Yes, we are learning to love in marriage. Agree. But so much of that learning to love is about you expanding in your capacity to love yourself and your understanding of all the ways that love could be. I think by putting it in 5 little boxes, it's too categorized. It's too small.
It's narrow.
It's too narrow. It's too rigid.
What? Amy said something's too rigid. Can you repeat that? It's recorded. I might not go back and listen to it.
It's too rigid. I know I like structure and you're the freedom guy.
That's amazing. This is the best day of my life, guys. Amy admitted something was too rigid.
It like boxes you into thinking, well, this is the only way I can give to my spouse or the only way they'll receive it. And I think that really limits the capacity, again, for not even each individual to grow, but the relationship of it as itself to grow. Because I really feel like I have learned a lot from understanding how you love me.
Yeah. Or even how, when I learned that's what I was seeking, I opened and expanded myself to so many other ways to be shown love. And when I wasn't so drilled into this, I gotta have this, man, it became more expansive.
Right.
And I was able to appreciate all the other things that went into you loving me. And when I was able to appreciate all those other things, it made that physical touch even more important to me. And yeah, I think you're exactly right. If it gets boxed in and it's rigid in a certain way, it keeps us narrow. And when we can expand and think beyond our narrow borders, it will always help us to grow. Even if we don't agree with it, right? That's the other thing we've talked about. I was so dogmatic in everything I did.
Yes.
I was like, I would toe every line, and that's the way, because that's the way it is. I was that way in my religious beliefs. I was that way in my political beliefs. I was that way in the way I raised my kids. I was that way in our relationship. And
about finances,
everything. I was so dogmatic. And once I was on something, there was nothing. There was no other way. And if you didn't believe that way, then you were wrong. Because I was going to be right.
And where's the space and the freedom and the movement and the expansion and the growth in that? It's so contracted.
Oh, no, and that's what I'm saying. It's so different now. I'm way more pragmatic. I'm way more open to a lot of things. Not in a bad way, but in a way of curiosity and understanding.
Acceptance.
Realize that there's truth in everything, and there's falsehoods in a lot of things, right? And that everyone doesn't have the exact truth out there, that you have to toe that line. And I recognize it when I hear it too, and I think to myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was obnoxious. So it's true. See, Amy laughed because she didn't want to say it. Yeah, you were. And yes, that's what she was thinking.
But I think that narrow-mindedness, again, keeps your capacity to grow small, keeps your relationship small, keeps the way that you're seeing your spouse small. I was just coaching with a couple today, and this person was saying, I had believed something for so long and it was just so narrow. And he was saying, I can't believe that I was so limited in this way. Like, there was so much out there, and yet he's like, it wasn't true, but it was just so familiar that it kept me locked in this perspective. And from that perspective, so much goodness and joy and growth and expansion were kept out. And I feel like that's what this does. It puts all of our capacity to love another person, to grow with this other person, in these 5 little boxes. And first of all, they just don't all fit into 5 boxes. And second of all, it keeps it so narrow.
I think another thing that we've talked a little bit about, and I feeds into this too, is inherently we want to be able to measure things.
Yes.
And in that measurement, we want to know if we're better, worse, the same. And this also does that, right? It says, here's a category, here's a stat I can measure. If I am, what was yours again? I can't remember what your language was.
Acts of service.
See how bad it was? If I'm doing 25 acts of service this week and I did 20 last week, that means I'm 5 better because I did 5 more of these things that told Amy that she was loved.
Therefore, I'm due 5 more acts.
Well, and it feeds into that, but it's this always having to measure where we're at. It doesn't allow us to be secure in who we are and okay with what we are and define for ourselves what it looks like to be successful. We're having these categories to either check a box, which it drives us into, right? That's always when we're measuring something. It
outside, externally.
Check this box. Yeah. Yes, this looks okay. I did this act of service, so I'm loving Amy. And it allows us to do that and measure ourselves against it. And it's human nature. It's what, as we're developing, that's what we want to see. We want to see that gold star on our forehead. We want to hear that attaboy. We want to do those things. And it's funny, I was having a conversation with one of my employees just the other day, and he'd gotten an attaboy, and we were laughing about it. And I said, yeah, keep going after those attaboys, because we actually give monetary rewards after a little while. And he told me of his very first person that trained him. He was a 911 dispatcher, and he got trained by the old school dispatch lady. And she was like stern, and you can't see on the video if you're not watching, but my brow is furrowed. And she told him, I rarely give attaboys, because if I give them out all the time, then you will never know when you really deserve an attaboy. And so that's made me laugh. So again, we want a way of measuring that we're doing the right things. And that's not a terrible thing to do. It's always good to check yourself where you're at. But when we get so narrowly focused in that measurement, we easily become check boxers. If that's a word, I just made another one up. And we check those boxes and we keep score when we're not getting to the underlying fact of being exposed and honest and true with each other about who we are.
It's so easy to keep score, and then that keeps all of your attention and focus outside of you, tracking someone else, blaming someone else, judging someone else, or even just judging yourself. And judgment doesn't ever lead to progress or development. It just leads to punishing yourself or someone else. Just this tracking, scorekeeping mindset is enough to really blind you.
And to me, I would do these things and then wonder why I wasn't getting laid, or wonder why I didn't feel any better. And I kept trying to do these things. And we talked about intentions behind it, right? This is how it always is. I could do the exact same thing in 2 different ways depending on my intentions.
Mm-hmm.
I could be doing those dishes, which I love to do, right? My favorite thing ever.
He hates dishes.
I've come to like them better, but I still dislike them. But I would do them all the time just because, one, I wanted to try to make Amy happy.
Which you can't ever make
Which
me
I
happy.
couldn't do it, and then I would do them wrong anyway, and she'd come back and redo them.
It's true.
But, I was doing it because I wanted to get something back. I was looking for that validation. I wanted to get laid out. All the things that
and
I
even
thought
the
were
belief that it was okay. If I give you this, then I'm owed this. That's how I get things. I do more things to get more from you.
right.
And even that just fundamental belief is so contrary to what actually creates a thriving marriage, and contrary to, I'm choosing to do this because it's in alignment with who I am, because it's who I want to be. Like, it's something outside of you dictating what you're doing instead of that like internal anchor of agency within you.
Absolutely.
And I think that internal anchor is, again, the most important thing. Like you said, with your intentions, if you're choosing to do something, do it because it's the way that you want to show up. It's the way that you want to be. It's the way that you want to give. It's how you're choosing to love. It's who you're choosing to love. And then the thing, whether it's acts of service, affirmation, touch, quality time, gift giving, doesn't matter so much as where your intention was.
Yeah.
Doing
And
it.
I go back, it still kind of blows my mind, because I really think that was my weakness, right? That was the place I needed to grow up, was the thing that I thought was my love language. That I was so doubled down on. If I had physical touch, then that meant Amy loved me. And it really distracted me on being open and honest about what was really going on and who I really was. And that's way more important than a category to say, this is how I feel loved.
Mm-hmm.
Even just saying this is how I feel loved is weird.
Yeah.
Like, why do I put it in a category that
Exactly.
of love?
Why? Love is love.
Boundless.
You can feel loved if you allow yourself from many different avenues. It's not so boxed in.
The smallest things, the smiley face I get from a text message from you, to the snuggling you in the morning. There's such a broad
To a look, to
Yeah.
an energy between us, to time together, to a conversation. I think all of them can be signs of a marriage, right? All of them are good things.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with affirmation or physical touch or service or quality time or gift giving. Like, nothing wrong with those.
None.
Nothing at all. Just the framing that do this and you'll get that.
Yeah. Or that I can only be loved in a certain way.
I can only be loved.
If it's only this way or that way. Maybe I have a secondary. I don't know. No, there's all kinds of ways to feel love. There's tons of ways.
And
They're
first, you've got to
uncountable.
be able to feel it within yourself and then receive it and give it. It's more about the giving and receiving and opening up your capacity to choose to love yourself and this person.
Yeah, I was hiding behind my love languages.
Yeah.
I was really hiding behind them because that's what I thought I needed. And that's the way I can measure I was loved.
And then you
again,
get to
all of-
justify
yeah.
and measure and blame and track. So it then creates, and again, I don't think the author intended for these types of behaviors to go along with them. I just think they're part of our human nature.
Yep.
And when you give humans 5 things to do, they're going to start tracking them.
Yep.
And they're going to start measuring, and they're going to start transacting, and they're going to start blaming and resenting. And I just think we're far more nuanced and complex, and we have more depth to us than 5 things.
We say it at work all the time, right? Be careful what you measure, because you will change behaviors. And sometimes you want to change those behaviors, and sometimes you don't. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's some unintended consequences about measuring how we're loved, is potentially changing behaviors that we weren't intending to be changed on both ends. For me, changing behavior that thinking that's the only way that I can be loved, and for you thinking that you had to do that and be obligated to do it, and cause resentment.
And you just stay there. Like when I was in that obligation, I have to do this or he won't feel loved. First of all, it wasn't creating any love between us, and you weren't feeling loved.
No, just the opposite.
It's fundamentally flawed, and I think people believe it so wholeheartedly and they take it in, and then they just get so stuck and think they're broken or something's wrong with them. And you're not broken. Nothing's wrong with you. This pattern, this belief, this framing is so broken. So another huge premise in this book is learning to be fluent in your partner's love language. So again, with the idea that if you just learn this language, then you're going to be happier because they're going to feel loved. But I don't want to be all negative in this podcast. I want to actually be real. And if we're going to criticize something, then let's give what actually is supportive and productive for marriages. So if you were learning to be fluent in anything to help a relationship thrive, to help there be connection, what would you advocate for to be fluent in?
I know exactly what this is. You need to be fluent in honesty.
Yes.
Pure honesty. And that goes to not just the daily things that you do. That almost, to me, that's less important because we got so stuck in it, especially around the porn problem. Yes, it was a problem, honestly, but we're so stuck in that rut of you have to be explicitly honest about yes, that's important to be honest but more around honest about what's really going on inside you. Mm-hmm. How am I really feeling today? Mm-hmm. What are the things that are impacting me? Mm-hmm. How can I express those to you? And then on the flip side, learning to be able to take those things in as a spouse, understand them, but not have them impact you in a negative way.
Right. The capacity to stand on your own emotionally, but be close. I think about so many situations that I coach with couples. I think about us. And the thing that was missing is that ability to be honest, because you're afraid that they'll view you, they'll judge you, they won't love you. I remember being afraid that you would leave me. I remember you being afraid that I would leave you if you were actually honest.
I told you were stuck with me. I was not leaving you.
And sometimes it's little things. It's things like, can you have the courage to speak up about different finances? Can you have the courage to speak up about things in intimacy? Can you have the courage to speak up about how you're hurting, or to look at yourself and see? For me, I had so much resentment when we first started this. And that resentment was a huge red flag that I was believing a lot of things that weren't true. I was expecting you to do a lot of things for me that you couldn't do. I was expecting you to make my anxiety go away, make me feel better, take care of problems that weren't yours to take care of. And having the courage to peel back the curtain even on my own resentment and be honest with myself, and then tell you about what I found and reveal and expose all the places that I was like, you know what, this isn't so pretty, and I see what I've been doing, and
being emotional naked is a lot scarier than being physical naked.
No, emotionally naked is way scarier.
Although you were scared of that too one time. Yeah. Always in the dark.
And courage feels terrible.
Oh, it's awful.
You feel a lot of self-respect and dignity and a lot of other emotions afterwards that are great. But in the moment of sharing, you actually feel pretty darn terrible.
And this doesn't come easy. It takes a lot of time. And I still hesitate at times, right? Like,
yeah.
Why shouldn't I? And hold on to things I probably should share sooner. And I've learned that I can, and Amy's not running away, and she's not going to be able to process it. And we're not going to find her in the closet crying. And it's all going to work out. And it's still really hard to do. If you struggle with this, welcome to being a human being.
Yeah. And I remember when I was struggling to get more courageous, not to run into the closet, to go crying, to be able to face the fears I had. At that time, I think we were working through a lot of porn. I still had a lot of anxiety about you with other women and what you were seeing and were you choosing me. And that's where I was way back then. And I remember hearing the statement, I'm not as fragile as I think I am. And it resonated in me in a way that I was like, ooh, listen to that. You're not as fragile as you think you are. Meaning you can get more curious. You can get more open. You can get more honest. You can see a little deeper here. Because anytime we would go into one of those conversations, I would fall apart. And that statement really began to resonate and provide that faith to step into the darkness of courage and to stay present and realize it wasn't fun and it didn't feel good, but we were making it through a lot more. Our conversations were becoming far more productive, and we were starting to develop instead of just getting up to the point of conflict and then running away from it.
Yeah, I think I've done you a disservice for a little bit because we've talked a lot about the actions and reactions that you had I've talked about you crying in the closet a lot, but I had my own really bad responses to these things.
Yes. You're like a sudden strike, like a little snake that comes out, and you're very calm, you're very loving, you're very affectionate until
I'm not.
You're not. And then when you go to win, there is a very quick, but I don't want to say deadly, but a very quick,
to
but
the core.
Sharp. Let's use sharp. Quick and fast, sharp bite, attack.
Yes, I'd go for the jugular.
Yes.
But then that was done. Like, I'm done. I'm not talking about it anymore.
Not done. You were over the anger.
No. I think when I say done bad, like I go in for the kill and then I've won and then now I've shut down.
Yeah.
Like, we're not talking about it anymore. I don't want to listen to you. You don't have anything valid to say.
Yeah.
I would wall myself off, pout.
Yes.
Like, yeah, I won. Now I'm angry. I'm just going to sit here and pout.
Yeah, now you got to take care of me. Yeah.
Yep. Now you got to make it up to me.
So what helped you get stronger to be able to listen to me?
Yeah, it was really being curious, for one, about what was going on behind it. Learning that there is a lot more around topics and things to say, that I wasn't going into the conversation for a victory. I was going in to be more curious and understanding what's happening. Mm-hmm. That's probably the biggest one. I've talked about it in other podcasts about, hey, I was a victor. I went in for the victory. And instead of going in and winning those conversations, I went in more curious. I came across a quote today that was wonderful. And he talked about it. Do you remember what it was, babe?
I'm trying to remember. It is Jefferson Fisher, who is, you've probably seen his Instagram. He's amazing on just navigating the topics of communication. And he was talking to Dave Ramsey in this interview and said, if you're going into a conversation to win, then you both lose.
Right. And
you lose the relationship.
Right. And he talked about a knot, right? He says, if you're pulling on your side of the rope and they're pulling on their side of the rope, what happens to that knot? It just gets tighter and tighter. And that totally sat with me. That's what we would do. You would tug on yours until I tugged too hard and then it was done. Same with the other way. If you tugged a little too hard, then I would go to my striking mode, backing off mode. And all it did was make that knot bigger. Mm-hmm. And so learning that I was going in there instead of trying to tug and win, I was going in there curious to find out what the knot was about, so that maybe I could push your way, you could push mine, it would release the pressure from the knot and we could unwind it.
Untangle it, yeah.
And so my whole concept around the way that I approached you and did things was a complete almost 180 from what I did before.
It was.
And it took a lot because I had measured everything in my life this way, right? I had measured whether I was being successful on my victories. If I could scratch another notch in that wall and say I did it, or in that belt, then I had won. And that's how I measured my goodness, is that I was right. And so for me to not go in there and pull was way beyond my capacity to even think about to begin with. And it took a lot of little movements of that way and saying, okay, this maybe will have some fruits that I'm looking for. Let me dig into this more. But it took a long time.
Yeah. And I see this a lot. That's where we see power struggles. That's where we see that conflict and couples just feeling so stuck. We see it with the 5 love languages. I'm giving them this. Why aren't they giving me that? And both people are pulling. You're not giving me what I want. You need to give me what I want. Right. And you're just so stuck. But instead, if you can move towards the curiosity of what might be happening here, what is the meaning for me? What is the meaning for them? What is emotionally happening within me? What do I need to be honest enough to look at in myself? And how can I approach this from a different perspective?
I don't know where it turned from. I'm really racking my brain with this, because the biggest moment it was the biggest thought that changed my mind was, two people can see something so very differently, and that's okay. That we have different perspectives based on where we come at it, how we're looking at it, what we're doing, what our experiences in life. There can be multiple perspectives on that. And that brings an abundance. That brings
depth and interest. And
it's like the conversation I shared on another podcast when I got picked up by the Ubered by the transgender individual. And we had this beautiful conversation. And we're just like, why can't we just look at others' perspectives and realize that life is boring if we're all the same?
Sameness is not what makes a marriage thrive. It's not what makes relationships thrive.
Go listen to our last podcast. It doesn't make eroticism either.
It doesn't make eroticism. And transacting, I give you this, you give me that, doesn't make eroticism. It doesn't make marriages thrive. It is being authentically honest in who you are and being willing to choose that other person exactly as they are. Yeah,
it was a major shift. And this shift had to take place before any of the physical, sexual stuff got better too. I had to shift my mindset in a completely different way. Think about not winning and not tugging on that rope, but pushing and untangling, thinking that there's multiple perspectives and that's a good thing, not a bad thing. And everyone shouldn't think like me because that's boring and awful. And so there was a lot of things that had to change.
Yeah. You can be right, or you can have a relationship.
Yeah, I
again, relationships asks us to expand, to see things from others' perspectives, to see things from others' experiences, to have the curiosity, the wonder, the openness. And you can do that when you're solid enough in yourself that you're not threatened by those differences. Then you can be flexible and open and curious enough to untangle the knot and see what's going on there. But you've got to be able to first be solid enough in yourself. Solid enough meaning that you have worth, you have value, you are lovable, and you're not trying to get that from your spouse. And I think that's part of what love languages do. They're like, I want to get my sense of self from you by you doing this thing for me. Instead, it's where do I need to strengthen my sense of self and then bring that to the relationship.
Yeah, the crazy part about it is that I came across very bravado, like I was all in confident, and I remember one time where you laughed at me and said something about the fact like, oh, you don't really care what people think. You just have this bravado and confidence all the time. And I didn't at the time, I wouldn't admit it because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if she only knew what was going on in my head right now, she would freak out because I have zero of that. I have zero. I'm just really good at acting and I can play this role if I need to. But at nighttime when I'm by myself, my eyes are closed. All those thoughts of and not being good enough and not being loved, they all came rushing in and they were very loud. And so I was really able to cover them up quite well. And that's what it looked like. But we'd put myself in this, hey, if you do this for me, then I'll be okay. So go buy the book. Read it. So now if the good Baptist preacher was a Baptist preacher.
It was a minister or preacher.
Some minister. If he listens to this podcast, he can't sue me. Because I told him to go buy his book. Go buy his book, learn what your love language is, and then figure out why the hell are you hiding behind that.
It's a twist on love languages.
Yeah. I think the most beautiful thing I've heard in a long time. So
There you go.
I'm not trying to give myself credit. It just, as we're talking about, really.
Validation
yeah.
whore.
No, I don't know. I validated myself, so that's
Okay,
not.
that's right.
I'm not trying to extract it out of you, so that's okay. Amy, was that good? Would I do a good job on that one? That would have been bad. But when I'm like, that was really good, I can pat myself on the back, and that's okay. But yeah, really, go figure out. If you haven't read it, go read it. If you read it and you know what your love language is, go ask the question. What am I hiding behind? Why is this the thing I think I need to be able to be loved?
To be okay.
Yep.
Or to feel loved.
Well, we appreciate every one of you. Amy thinks I'm crazy because I have this thing where I just go watch how many people have listened to the podcast. It's my new, instead of social media being bad, it's my new pastime. And I love it. It's growing. We're breaking records every week. Except this week we need one more download. So if this will be too late when I publish this. But we're tied for our record this week so far.
That's hilarious.
One more day.
I have no idea. Remember when we talked earlier about tracking and how humans love to
maybe
track?
I'm doing something bad. But anyway, I enjoy it. So thank you so much for everybody. And I can't tell you how wonderful it is to hear from you.
Yes.
And that we're having an impact. It's been beautiful and we appreciate it. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. It's real easy. Greg at langfordlifecoaching.com or
Amy at langfordlifecoaching.com.
We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to these podcasts. That helps it grow.
Share with your friends.
Tell everyone
Leave
about it.
us a review or some stars.
Yep. And if you don't like something,
let us know that too.
Okay. Let us know that too. I was going to tell them not to tell us, but
Oh.
You're right. That wouldn't be very grown up of me.
And we have gotten some really great ideas. So we are listening. We do hear you, and we are going to use those in future episodes. So listen for your ideas.
And just a teaser coming up. We're going to have a former
client
couple come on our next podcast. Can't wait for that too.
So you can hear what it's like in the trenches coaching with us.
From the other side. So
yeah,
go visit us on langfordlifecoaching.com. Sign up for that free consult. We'd love to hear from you.
Have a blessed day.
Until next time.
Keep undressing your intimacy.
Bye-bye.